The wind carries something ancient across this endless grassland. The steppe stretches in every direction, golden brown beneath a sky so vast it seems to press down upon the earth itself. Felt-covered gers dot the horizon, their rounded forms rising like pale stones against the grass. Smoke curls from their openings. Horses stand in clusters, their manes catching the light. This is the Mongolian plateau, the crucible where the largest contiguous land empire in human history was forged from nothing but courage, kinship, and an unbreakable will to survive. The centuries have rolled backward. The empire breathes again. This is the world of the Mongols, and the story that begins here, among these wind-swept plains between the Khenti Mountains and the Onon River, will reshape every corner of the known earth. A boy named Temujin, born around 1162 into the Borjigin clan, orphaned, enslaved, and abandoned by his own people, will rise from the lowest depths of steppe society to become Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. From this grass, from these horses, from the composite bows of horn and sinew and birch, held by riders who learn to shoot before they learn to walk, an unstoppable force will emerge that shatters empires from the Pacific coast to the gates of Vienna. What unfolds across this series is the complete story. From the earliest nomadic pastoralists who carved petroglyphs into stone thousands of years ago, through the Xiongnu and Göktürk confederations that preceded the Mongols, through the warring clans of the 12th century, through Temujin's extraordinary rise and the conquests that toppled the Khwarezmian Empire, the Jin dynasty, and the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. The construction of Karakorum, with its legendary silver tree fountain, will rise before us. The Mongol cavalry will thunder into Europe. Kublai Khan will build Khan Balik on the site of modern Beijing and proclaim the Yuan dynasty. And then, the fracture. 4 Khanates splitting across Eurasia, each absorbing the cultures they once conquered. The Black Death traveling along the very trade routes the Mongols protected. And finally, the slow dissolution, the retreat to the steppe, and the enduring legacy written into modern borders, genetic lineages, and the face on Mongolian currency today. But this is more than a chronicle of conquest. The intimate details of daily life on the steppe will emerge, the assembly of a ger in 30 minutes from willow lattice and felt, the fermentation of mare's milk into airag, the shamanic rituals beneath the eternal blue sky. The remarkable power of Mongol women, regents who governed the entire empire, will be revealed. The Yam postal system spanning 1,400 stations across a continent, the religious tolerance that placed Buddhist temples beside mosques, beside Nestorian churches, the Yasa legal code that bound conqueror and conquered alike under a single law. What began on this steppe shaped the world still inhabited today. Russian governance, Persian art, Chinese dynastic transitions, the Mughal architecture of India, even the genetic code carried by an estimated 16 million living men, all trace their origins to the empire born here. Some of the most profound transformations in human civilization, the reopening of the Silk Road, the spread of gunpowder and printing and plague across continents, began with the thunder of Mongol hooves on this very grass. If these complete journeys through ancient civilizations speak to something deep within, please subscribe so the next exploration is not missed. Each week, the full story of a lost world is brought back to life. Let us begin our journey here on the steppe, where the wind still remembers. dawn light spills across a grassland so vast it bends with the curvature of the earth. The Mongolian plateau stretches in every direction, a sea of feathergrass and wild onion rolling between mountain ranges that frame the sky like the walls of an open cathedral. To the northeast, the Khenti Mountains rise dark with Siberian pine. To the south, the land dries and hardens into the gravel plains of the Gobi. Between these extremes, the Onon and Kurlan rivers carve silver paths through valleys where horses have grazed for millennia. This is a landscape that permits no permanence. No city can root itself in soil that freezes to iron in winter and bakes to dust in summer. The people who survive here move with the seasons, following grass, following water, following the ancient logic of the herd. Their homes are felt-covered shelters stretched over collapsible willow frames, light enough for ox carts, warm enough for winds that descend from the Siberian Arctic. Their wealth is measured in livestock. Their calendar is written in the movement of animals across the land. Petroglyphs carved into rock faces across the plateau record the presence of pastoral nomads stretching back thousands of years. Figures on horseback chase ibex and deer across stone canvases weathered by wind and ice. These images mark the emergence of a way of life that would define Central Asia, a civilization built not on stone foundations, but on the bond between human and horse. By the 3rd century before the Common Era, the steppe produces its first great empire. Under Modu Chanyu, who seizes power around 209 before the Common Era through the murder of his own father, the Xiongnu Confederation unites the nomadic tribes into a military force powerful enough to threaten Han Dynasty China. The Xiongnu organize their warriors into decimal units of tens, hundreds, and thousands. They perfect mounted archery. They extract tribute from the wealthiest empire on earth. Their royal burial mounds at Noin Ula, excavated in the 20th century, reveal silk brocades, lacquerware, and silver ornaments that speak of vast trade networks connecting the steppe to China, Persia, and beyond. The Xiongnu eventually fracture and fade, but the pattern they establish endures. The steppe does not forget its lessons. 6 centuries later, the Gokturks rise to dominance, forging a confederation stretching from Manchuria to the Black Sea. In the Orkhon Valley, they erect stone monuments inscribed with runic script, the oldest known Turkic writing. These inscriptions speak of the eternal blue sky, Tengri, the supreme deity whose favor grants sovereignty over the grasslands. They record the deeds of khans and the duties of warriors. They warn against the seductions of Chinese civilization, against abandoning the steppe for walled cities and silk robes. The Gokturks collapse by the mid-8th century, torn apart by internal rivalries and Tang dynasty pressure. After them come the Uyghurs, then the Khitan, whose Liao dynasty controls much of Manchuria and the eastern steppe from 907 to 1125. Each successor inherits fragments of what came before: the decimal military structure, the reverence for Tengri, the understanding that the steppe rewards mobility and punishes those who stand still. By the 12th century, the plateau has no single master. The great confederations have dissolved into dozens of competing clans and tribal groupings. Yet buried within this apparent chaos lies a deep institutional memory. The knowledge of how to forge an empire from horseback, how to organize scattered herders into disciplined armies, how to project power across impossible distances. All of this persists in oral tradition, in the songs of elders, in the muscle memory of riders who learn the bow before they learn to walk. The steppe waits, as it has always waited, for the next hand strong enough to gather its scattered threads into a single rope. The 12th century opens across the Mongolian plateau like a wound that refuses to close. Smoke rises from scattered encampments along the Onon and Kurlan rivers, each cluster of felt gers marking the territory of a clan bound by blood, by marriage, by the fragile arithmetic of mutual survival. There is no central authority. There is no law beyond what a chieftain can enforce with the loyalty of his riders and the reach of his arrows. The steppe has fractured into a constellation of rival powers, and each one watches the others with the patient, predatory attention of wolves circling the same kill. The largest of these confederations command vast stretches of grassland. The Karaites dominate the central steppe, their territory spreading across the rich pastures between the Toul and Orkhon rivers. Their leaders have forged an extraordinary connection with Nestorian Christianity, a faith carried eastward along trade routes centuries earlier. Karate chieftains bear Christian names alongside their Turkic and Mongol titles, and Nestorian crosses appear among their grave goods. This religious affiliation gives them diplomatic links stretching toward the Syriac Christian communities of Mesopotamia, a thread of connection spanning thousands of kilometers of desert and mountain. To the west, the Naimans control the Altai mountain approaches, a powerful confederation with ties to the Uyghur literate tradition. Their court employs scribes who write in the Uyghur script, an administrative sophistication rare among steppe peoples. To the east and south, the Tatars hold territory near the borders of the Jurchen Jin dynasty of northern China, serving intermittently as mercenary allies to the Jin court, which deliberately plays steppe factions against one another to prevent any single group from growing too strong. The Merkits inhabit the forested river valleys near Lake Baikal, fierce raiders whose geographic position along the Selenga River grants them access to both forest and steppe resources. And scattered among these greater powers, smaller tribal groupings persist: the Taichi Ud, the Jadaran, the Ongirat, and the Borjigin Mongols, a clan whose name will one day become synonymous with empire, but who in this era represent merely one minor lineage among dozens. The political architecture of this world rests on kinship and personal obligation. The institution of Anda, blood brotherhood sworn between men of different clans, creates bonds that theoretically transcend tribal loyalty. Leaders cement alliances through strategic marriages, offering daughters and sisters as bridges between hostile camps. Yet these bonds break as easily as they form. A stolen horse herd, a disputed pasture, an insult at a feast, any of these can shatter a generation of careful diplomacy overnight. Warfare follows a seasonal rhythm dictated by grass and weather. Raiding intensifies in autumn, when horses are fat from summer grazing, and warriors can carry dried meat and fermented milk for weeks of campaigning. The composite bow remains the supreme instrument of steppe violence, its laminated construction of horn, sinew, and birch delivering killing force from horseback, at distances that render infantry nearly helpless. Every male learns mounted archery from childhood, and tribal councils evaluate a chieftain's worth primarily by his ability to lead successful raids and distribute plunder. The Jin dynasty exploits this chaos with calculated precision, commissioning Tatar warriors to attack any steppe leader who grows too ambitious. Around 1170, this policy claims the life of a Borjigin chieftain named Bartan Bayata's grandson Yesuge, a minor but rising figure who has begun gathering followers through successful raids against the Tatars themselves. The Tatars poison Yesuge at a shared meal, a treachery that leaves his young family defenseless and his small coalition of followers scattered. Yesuge's eldest son is a boy of perhaps 9 years, dark-eyed and watchful. His name is Temujin. The clan abandons the widow Hoelun and her children on the open steppe, a death sentence in all but name. No one on the plateau in 1171 imagines that this orphaned child, scraping for roots and marmots along the Onon River, carries within him the force that will remake the entire world. The steppe in its cruelty has produced the very thing its warring clans most fear, a survivor with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The Khenti Mountains rise in dark green folds against the northern sky, their slopes thick with larch and birch, their streams feeding the Onon River as it winds through valleys where wolves howl at dusk. Somewhere along these banks, in the years following 1171, a widow and her children survive on what the land reluctantly offers. Hoelun digs for wild onion and garlic roots, teaches her sons to fish with bone hooks, and keeps her small family alive through winters that crack the earth. The ger they inhabit is patched and threadbare, its felt walls thin against the wind. There are no herds, no horses worth riding, no warriors sworn to protect them. This is destitution on the steppe, a condition more dangerous than open warfare. Temujin grows lean and watchful in this crucible. He learns to read the moods of the sky, the movements of animals, the intentions hidden behind a stranger's approach. The secret history of the Mongols records that he kills his half-brother Bekta in a dispute over a stolen fish, an act that reveals both the desperation of their circumstances and the cold resolve already forming in the boy. Hoelun's fury at this killing carries the weight of a mother who understands that violence within the family threatens the fragile thread holding them to survival. The Taichi Ud, the very clan that abandoned Hoelun's family, eventually come for the growing boy. They capture Temujin and lock him in a wooden kangwe, a heavy yoke fitted around the neck and wrists, parading him through their camps as a prisoner. He is perhaps 15 or 16. The humiliation is deliberate, meant to crush any ambition before it takes root. But Temujin escapes in darkness, slipping into the Onon River and hiding among the reeds, aided by a sympathetic Taichi Ud family who risk their own lives to shelter him. This escape becomes foundational to his legend, the first proof that he possesses something beyond ordinary endurance. The years that follow see Temujin slowly rebuilding from nothing. He seeks out Berta, the girl pledged to him in childhood by arrangement between their fathers. Their marriage, likely around 1180, brings a crucial alliance with her family and a dowry of a fine sable coat. Temujin carries this coat to Togrul, the powerful Khan of the Karaites, who had once been blood brother to Yesuge. The sable secures Togrul's patronage, a relationship that will prove essential for the next 2 decades. Through Togrul, Temujin gains access to warriors, horses, and the political networks of a major tribal confederation. He also rekindles his bond with Jamuka, a boy with whom he had twice sworn the oath of Anda, blood brotherhood, in childhood. Together they ride, raid, and gather followers. But the alliance contains the seeds of its own dissolution, for both young men possess the ambition to lead, and the steppe tolerates only one supreme authority at a time. Around 1184, disaster strikes. A Merkit raiding party descends on Temujin's small camp and seizes Berta, carrying her away as a captive. The abduction echoes the Merkit grudge against his family, for Yasuge had himself taken Hoelun from a Merkit man years before. Temujin turns to Toghrul's and Jamukha, and together they assemble a force of perhaps 20,000 riders. The assault on the Merkit camps is swift and devastating, scattering the tribe along the Selenge River. Berta is recovered, though she is pregnant, and the paternity of her first son, Yochi, will remain a source of whispered doubt for generations. This victory transforms Temujin from a marginal survivor into a figure of genuine military consequence. Warriors begin drifting toward his banner, drawn not by noble lineage, but by his demonstrated capacity to protect those who follow him and destroy those who oppose him. He rewards loyalty regardless of birth, a revolutionary principle on a steppe where bloodline determines everything. By the late 1180s, Temujin commands a growing coalition of fighters and families, camped along the river valleys of the Khenti foothills, still subordinate to Toghrul, still bound in fragile brotherhood with Jamukha, but unmistakably ascending. The orphan has become a force that the warring clans can no longer afford to ignore. The alliance between Temujin and Jamukha, once sealed in the sacred ritual of Anda brotherhood, fractures slowly and then all at once. By the early 1190s, the two men command rival coalitions camped within striking distance of each other along the tributaries of the Onon. Jamukha, aristocratic and proud, draws followers who believe in the old order of noble blood and inherited rank. Temujin attracts a different kind of loyalty. Herders, outcasts, warriors from shattered clans who care nothing for lineage and everything for survival. The steppe is not large enough for both visions. The break comes violently. Jamukha rallies a confederation of tribes and inflicts a stinging defeat on Temujin's forces, driving him into retreat among the forested valleys of the Khenti range. Yet Jamukha squanders his advantage through cruelty, reportedly boiling captured chiefs alive in iron cauldrons. Warriors who had followed him out of obligation begin slipping away in the night, riding toward Temujin's campfires. Defeat becomes, paradoxically, a recruitment tool. Through the late 1190s, Temujin rebuilds methodically. He turns first against the Tatars, the tribe responsible for his father Yasuge's poisoning decades earlier. In 1202, his forces crush the Tatar confederation in a campaign of systematic annihilation. Every Tatar male standing taller than the linchpin of a cartwheel is executed. The women and children are absorbed into Mongol households. It is a genocide calculated to eliminate not merely an enemy, but the very possibility of future Tatar resistance. The steppe watches and understands the message. The next target is Temujin's own patron. Toghrul Khan of the Karaites, once a surrogate father, grows suspicious of his protege's rising power. Whispered provocations from Jamukha and Toghrul's own son Sengum push the old Khan toward confrontation. In 1203, after failed negotiations and a bitter three-day battle at the Kala Khaljid Sands, Temujin defeats the Karaite Confederation. Toghrul flees westward and is killed by Naiman border guards who fail to recognize him. The Karaite people, with their Nestorian Christian traditions and sophisticated court culture, are folded into Temujin's expanding nation. Only the Naimans remain. In 1204, Temujin marches west against Tayang Khan's Naiman Confederation, the last great tribal power on the Mongolian plateau. Jamukha fights alongside the Naimans in a final desperate alliance. The battle unfolds across open grassland, and the Naiman army, though numerous, collapses under the disciplined pressure of Temujin's decimal organized formations. Tayang Khan dies in the fighting. Jamukha escapes but is betrayed by his own followers and delivered to Temujin, who executes him, granting, according to tradition, a noble death without the spilling of blood. With every rival confederation destroyed or absorbed, Temujin undertakes the most radical transformation in steppe history. He dismantles the ancient tribal structure entirely. Warriors are reorganized into units of 10, called arbans, then hundreds, thousands, and finally tumens of 10,000, with commanders appointed by merit rather than birth. Men from defeated tribes serve alongside former enemies, their old clan identities deliberately dissolved. Loyalty flows not to family or tribe, but to the Khan alone. Iron forges glow across encampments as arrowheads, lance tips, and armor plates are hammered into standardized forms. Felt-covered girs are arranged not by kinship, but by military unit. A new social order crystallizes on the open plain, one built for war and absolute obedience. In the spring of 1206, on the banks of the Onon River, a great Kuriltai assembles. Thousands of warriors and their families gather beneath white horsehair banners snapping in the wind. The assembled chiefs proclaim Temujin as Genghis Khan, a title meaning universal ruler. A white felt carpet is spread beneath him, and he is raised upon it, lifted symbolically above all others. The fractured steppe, for the first time in recorded memory, speaks with a single voice. What had been a patchwork of warring clans is now a nation forged in iron and bound by a single will, poised at the edge of a world that does not yet know what is coming. The white horsehair banners still ripple above the Onon River encampment, but the work of empire has already begun. Within months of the 1206 Kuriltai, the newly proclaimed Genghis Khan turns his attention from conquest to construction, not of cities or monuments, but of systems. The open steppe becomes a drafting table for one of history's most ambitious experiments in governance, the transformation of a nomadic warrior confederation into a centralized imperial state capable of projecting power across continents. The first and most enduring instrument is the Yasa, the Great Law. No single written copy survives intact, but its provisions, recorded by Persian and Chinese chroniclers, reveal a legal code of extraordinary scope. The Yasa codifies punishments for theft, adultery, and the pollution of running water. It mandates religious tolerance across all faiths, exempting priests, monks, and imams from taxation. It establishes rules for the distribution of war spoils, the treatment of envoys as inviolable, and the absolute prohibition against sheltering enemy fugitives. Violations carry death. The law applies equally to commoner and noble, a principle revolutionary in its implications. To administer this code, Genghis Khan appoints Shigi Kutuk, his adopted brother, as chief judge, the supreme arbiter of disputes across the growing realm. Gold paisa tablets, rectangular plaques inscribed with the Khan's authority, become the physical currency of imperial power. Carried by messengers and officials, each tablet commands obedience from every subject who encounters its bearer. The paisa system transforms the steppe's informal networks of obligation into a formalized chain of command, radiating outward from the Khan's own ger. The keshig, the imperial guard, crystallizes into the empire's most elite institution. Numbering 10,000 warriors drawn from every tribe, the Kashig serves simultaneously as bodyguard, administrative corps, and hostage system. The sons and brothers of commanders serve within its ranks, binding the loyalty of distant generals to the Khan's person. Day guards, night guards, and quiver bearers rotate in precise shifts. Membership in the Kashig carries status above that of an ordinary commander of 1,000, ensuring that proximity to the Khan remains the highest honor in the empire. The adoption of the Uyghur script gives the Mongol language its first written form. Captured Uyghur scribes teach Mongol administrators to record decrees, census data, and correspondence on paper and birch bark. The vertical script, flowing downward like rain on a tent wall, becomes the administrative sinew of empire. For the first time, orders from the Khan's court can travel in written form across thousands of kilometers, arriving with precision no oral message can match. Commanders rise through merit rather than birth. Subutai, the son of a blacksmith, ascends to become the Khan's most brilliant strategist. Jebe, who once shot Genghis Khan's horse from under him in battle and confessed it openly, earns command through that very honesty. Mukhale, a veteran of the unification wars, receives authority over operations against the Eurasian Jin dynasty in the east. The principle is consistent: loyalty and ability outweigh lineage. Between 1205 and 1209, the new empire tests itself against the Western Xia kingdom of the Tangut people along the Yellow River's upper reaches. 3 successive campaigns probe Tangut defenses, forcing the kingdom into tributary submission by 1209. These raids serve a dual purpose. They secure the empire's southern flank and train the newly reorganized decimal army in coordinated operations against fortified settlements, a form of warfare the steppe warriors have not yet mastered. The encampment of the Khan grows in complexity. Felt-walled gurs cluster in ordered rows according to military unit. Smoke rises from cooking fires where dried meat and fermented mare's milk sustain a population perpetually in motion. Yet beneath this familiar pastoral surface, something unprecedented takes shape. A state apparatus capable of governing millions, dispensing justice across linguistic and cultural boundaries, and mobilizing resources with a speed no sedentary kingdom can match. The steppe has not merely produced a conqueror, it has produced an architect of empire, and the blueprints he draws in these early years will outlast every city his armies will one day burn. The Gobi stretches south like a pale scar across the earth, its gravel plains shimmering under a white sun. In the autumn of 1211, columns of Mongol horsemen move through this emptiness in disciplined silence, each rider trailing a string of remounts, saddlebags packed with dried curd and strips of wind-hardened meat. The army numbers between 65,000 and 100,000 warriors, organized into the decimal formations perfected over the previous 5 years. They ride toward the greatest fortified civilization on earth. The Eurasian Jin dynasty, rulers of northern China, commanders of walled cities, masters of a population numbering roughly 53 million souls. The Jin frontier defenses are formidable. Rammed earth walls snake across mountain passes, garrisoned by soldiers equipped with crossbows, fire lances, and iron-tipped bolts. The Juyong Pass and its surrounding fortifications guard the approaches to the capital, Zhongdu. Yet the Mongol advance exploits a critical weakness. Khitan and Chinese defectors, resentful of Jurchen rule, provide intelligence on garrison strengths and supply routes. At Yehuling, Badger Pass, in the autumn of 1211, the Mongol vanguard meets a Jin field army deployed across the narrow defile. The battle that follows is devastating. Mongol cavalry feign retreat, drawing the Jin infantry forward and away from their fortified positions, then wheel and strike from the flanks. The Jin losses are catastrophic, and the mountain passes fall open like unlatched gates. What follows is not a single siege but a campaign of systematic devastation across the northern Chinese plain. Mongol columns fan outward, burning harvests, destroying irrigation works, driving refugees toward walled cities to strain their food supplies. The steppe warriors, initially helpless before high stone walls and moated fortifications, adapt with extraordinary speed. Captured Jin engineers and Khitan siege specialists are pressed into service. Trebuchets rise on the plains outside city walls, hurling stone and incendiary projectiles. Battering rams sheathed in wet hides approach under covering arrow fire. The Mongols learn to divert rivers, to undermine foundations, to starve garrisons into submission through months of patient encirclement. Zhongdu itself, the Jin capital on the site of modern Beijing, is a city of immense sophistication. Palaces with glazed ceramic roof tiles, gardens of cultivated peonies, libraries holding centuries of accumulated scholarship. Its walls extend for miles, thick enough to resist conventional assault. The Jin court, paralyzed by internal faction and the sheer speed of the Mongol advance, attempts negotiation. A temporary settlement in 1214 buys time, but when the Jin emperor relocates his capital south to Kaifeng, Genghis Khan interprets the move as betrayal. In the spring of 1215, Mongol forces encircle Zhongdu. The siege is prolonged and merciless. Supply lines into the city are severed. Famine grips the population. Reports from surviving chronicles describe desperate conditions within the walls. Granaries emptied, horses slaughtered, the weakest perishing in the streets. When the city finally falls in the summer of 1215, the destruction is immense. Fires burn for a month. The accumulated wealth of the Jin northern capital, silk, gold, jade, lacquerware, printed books, is loaded onto carts and carried north toward the steppe. The fall of Zhongdu marks a transformation not only of the war, but of the Mongol state itself. The empire now possesses the administrative machinery of a sedentary civilization: tax collectors, census takers, scribes literate in Chinese and Eurasian. Yelu Chukai, a Khitan scholar descended from the old Liao dynasty aristocracy, enters Mongol service and begins shaping fiscal policy. The conquest is far from complete. The Jin will resist for nearly 2 more decades, but the strategic balance has shifted irreversibly. In 1217, Genghis Khan appoints his trusted General Mukhali as viceroy of northern China, granting him authority to continue the campaign, while the Khan himself turns his gaze westward, toward the wealthy cities of Central Asia and the Khwarezmian Empire beyond the mountains. The steppe army has learned to break walls, and the world behind those walls will never be the same. The Khwarezmian Empire stretches from the Aral Sea to the Persian Gulf, its cities jeweled with turquoise tilework and fed by ancient irrigation canals that thread through the dry earth of Transoxiana like silver veins. Bukhara, Samarkand, Merv, Nishapur, these are among the wealthiest cities on earth in the early 13th century, centers of Islamic scholarship, trade, and craftsmanship. Shah Muhammad II commands an army numbering perhaps 400,000, drawn from Turkic and Persian levies across a vast domain. He has every reason to believe his empire is untouchable. The provocation arrives in 1218. A Mongol trade caravan of several hundred merchants reaches the border city of Otrar, carrying goods intended to open commercial relations. In Alchuk, the governor of Otrar and a relative of the Shah accuses the merchants of espionage, seizes their goods, and executes them. Genghis Khan sends ambassadors demanding justice. The Shah has the lead envoy killed and sends the others back with shaved beards, an unforgivable insult in steppe custom. The response will be total. In the autumn of 1219, an army of roughly 100 to 150,000 Mongol warriors crosses the Tian Shan passes and descends into Central Asia. The campaign unfolds with a precision that reveals years of intelligence gathering. Genghis Khan divides his forces into multiple columns. His sons Yochi, Chagatai, and Ögedei besiege Otrar, which falls after 5 months of desperate resistance. Inalchuk is captured and executed, molten silver reportedly poured into his eyes and ears. The Khan himself leads a force across the Kizilkum Desert, a route the Khwarezmians consider impassable, and appears before Bukhara in February of 1220, bypassing the Shah's defensive lines entirely. The garrison flees, the city surrenders. Mongol soldiers strip the great mosques for use as stables, and the population is driven out while the city burns. Bukhara's fall sends shockwaves across the empire. Samarkand, the imperial jewel with its massive walls and garrison of perhaps 100,000 defenders, holds for only 5 days. Mongol siege engineers, many of them Chinese and Muslim captives pressed into service, deploy catapults, naphtha, and massed prisoner columns driven before the advancing army. The city capitulates in March of 1220. Artisans and engineers are separated from the population and sent east. The rest face slaughter or enslavement. Shah Muhammad, paralyzed by the speed of the Mongol advance, refuses to concentrate his forces for a decisive battle. He retreats westward, abandoning city after city. Genghis Khan dispatches 2 of his finest generals, Jebe and Subutai, with 20,000 cavalry to pursue the Shah across Persia. Muhammad flees through Nishapur, through the mountains of northern Iran, finally reaching a small island in the Caspian Sea, where he dies in December of 1220, broken and stripped of everything. The destruction that follows is methodical. Tolui, the Khan's youngest son, leads the assault on Merv in February of 1221. The city, one of the largest in the world, with a population estimated at several 100,000, surrenders after a brief siege. The inhabitants are marched on to the plain and divided among the Mongol soldiers. Medieval chroniclers record that approximately 1,200,000 perished, though modern historians debate the figure. Nishapur falls next, its population massacred after a Mongol general is killed during the siege. Herat resists, submits, then revolts, and is destroyed in turn. The irrigation systems that sustained Transoxiana for centuries are wrecked. Canals that took generations to build collapse into mud. Agricultural land reverts to desert. Cities that were among the most sophisticated in the Islamic world are reduced to rubble and bone. The destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire takes barely 2 years, and its completeness stuns the entire medieval world. From the banks of the Syr Darya to the shores of the Caspian, the message is absolute. Resistance invites annihilation, and the Mongol army moves faster than any warning can travel. While the ruins of Khwarezm still smolder, two of Genghis Khan's most brilliant commanders ride not homeward, but deeper into the unknown. In 1221, Subutai and Jebi receive permission to pursue the fleeing Shah Muhammad westward, and what begins as a chase becomes one of the most extraordinary military expeditions in recorded history. Roughly 20,000 horsemen cross the Iranian plateau, round the southern shore of the Caspian Sea, and plunge into the mountain passes of the Caucasus. The distances are staggering. The terrain shifts from Persian desert to Georgian highland forest to the frozen grasslands north of the Black Sea, an arc of nearly 8,000 kilometers through lands no Mongol has ever seen. The column moves with terrifying efficiency. Georgian armies meet them in the mountain valleys and are defeated. The Kipchak Turks of the southern Russian steppe, initially allied against the invaders, are peeled away through diplomacy and bribery, then attacked once isolated. Every engagement serves a dual purpose, victory and intelligence. Subutai catalogues terrain, river crossings, the fighting capacity of local forces, the political fractures between principalities. This is reconnaissance on a continental scale, conducted at the speed of cavalry. By the spring of 1223, the Mongol force reaches the Dnieper basin. A coalition of Rus princes, alarmed by Kipchak refugees flooding westward, assembles a combined army. The forces meet at the Kalka River on the 31st of May. The Rus commanders, fractious and uncoordinated, attack piecemeal. Mstislav the Bold of Galicia charges ahead without waiting for his allies. Subutai draws the vanguard forward with a feigned retreat, then encircles and destroys each contingent in sequence. The rout is total. Several captured princes are placed beneath a wooden platform where the Mongol commanders feast, slowly crushing them, a method of execution that avoids the spilling of royal blood in accordance with Mongol custom. The victory at the Kalka River sends a shockwave across Eastern Europe, though its full significance will not be understood for another 15 years. Subutai and Jebe then wheel eastward, rejoining the main Mongol forces. Jebe dies during the return journey, the circumstances unrecorded. The intelligence gathered during the Great Raid will prove invaluable when the Mongols return to Europe in force under Batu Khan. Genghis Khan himself spends the early 1220s consolidating control over the shattered Khwarezmian territories and returning eastward. By 1226, his attention turns to unfinished business. The Western Siar kingdom of the Tangut people, once a vassal state, has refused to supply troops for the Khwarezmian campaign. This defiance demands punishment. The Mongol army descends on the irrigated cities of the Tangut realm along the Yellow River's upper reaches, systematically dismantling a civilization built on careful water management and Buddhist scholarship. The campaign is merciless. City after city falls through the winter and spring of 1226 and 1227. The capital Zhongxing, surrounded by canals and fortifications, endures a prolonged siege. During this final campaign, in August of 1227, Genghis Khan dies. The exact cause remains debated. Illness, a fall from his horse, complications from an old injury. The secret history of the Mongols, composed decades later, offers only veiled accounts. His commanders conceal the death until Zhongxing surrenders, then destroy the city utterly. The Tangut kingdom ceases to exist. A funeral cortege carries the body northward across the steppe toward the Khenti Mountains and the sacred peak of Burkhan Khaldun, where Temujin once hid as a fugitive boy. According to tradition, every living thing encountered along the route is killed to keep the burial location secret. The grave is unmarked, its precise location unknown to this day. Horses trample the ground smooth. A river may have been diverted to cover the site. Soldiers who attend the burial are themselves executed. The steppe grass grows over the place where the conqueror rests, indistinguishable from the endless land that made him. He leaves behind an empire stretching from the Pacific to the Caspian, a military system without parallel, and 4 sons whose rivalries will shape the next century of human history. 2 years pass before the empire chooses its next ruler. The mourning period stretches across seasons, and the vast territories Genghis Khan conquered hold their breath in an uneasy interregnum. Tolui, the youngest son, serves as regent according to Mongol custom, administering the heartland while messengers ride thousands of kilometers to summon princes and commanders to a great Kuriltai. In the summer of 1229, on the banks of the Kurlan River, the assembled nobility confirms what Genghis Khan himself had designated before his death. Ögedei, the 3rd son, ascends to the throne of the Mongol Empire. He is not the fiercest warrior among the brothers. That distinction belongs to Chagatai, the disciplinarian, or to Tolui, the brilliant field commander. Ögedei's genius lies elsewhere, in diplomacy, administration, and an expansive generosity that binds loyalty through lavish reward rather than terror alone. He is also a man of legendary appetites. His drinking bouts become so severe that his brother Chagatai assigns a mander to count his cups, a measure Ögedei circumvents by simply using larger vessels. Yet beneath the revelry operates a sharp administrative mind. Ögedei transforms the Mongol state from a mobile war machine into a functioning empire. He institutes a formal taxation system across conquered territories, replacing the arbitrary plunder of earlier campaigns. He orders a comprehensive census of subjugated populations in northern China and Central Asia, counting households, livestock, and arable land to rationalize tribute collection. He appoints Yelu Chukai, a Khitan scholar who had served the Jin dynasty, as chief administrator, importing bureaucratic methods refined over centuries of Chinese governance. The completion of the Jin dynasty conquest comes in 1234. Mongol and allied Song dynasty forces besiege Kaifeng, the Jin capital, through a brutal winter. The last Jin emperor flees south to the fortress city of Kaiju, where he takes his own life as Mongol soldiers breach the walls. Northern China, from the Yellow River to the Manchurian forests, falls entirely under Mongol dominion. In 1235, Ögedei orders the construction of Karakorum in the Orkhon Valley of central Mongolia, a site already sacred in steppe memory. The ancient Göktürk and Uyghur empires had placed their capitals nearby. Rammed earth walls rise around a modest but cosmopolitan city. The Palace of 10,000 Tranquilities anchors the complex, its 64 columns supporting a grand audience hall, where the Khan receives ambassadors from Korea to Christendom. A Parisian silversmith named Guillaume Boucher, captured during the Hungarian campaigns, constructs the city's most famous marvel, a great silver tree with 4 serpents coiled at its base, dispensing ayrag, wine, rice mead, and honey drink from separate spouts during imperial feasts. An angel figure crowns the tree, its trumpet blown by a man hidden in a vault below to signal the flow of beverages. Karakorum is deliberately pluralistic. Within its walls stand 12 Buddhist temples, 2 mosques, and a Nestorian Christian church, all functioning simultaneously. Merchants from dozens of nations crowd its markets. The city is not large, a brisk walk covers its full extent, but its symbolic weight is immense. For the first time, the Mongols possess a fixed capital, a place where the world comes to them. The Yam postal relay system expands dramatically under Ögedei's patronage. Relay stations appear every 40 to 50 kilometers across the empire, each maintaining fresh horses, provisions, and shelter. Riders carrying urgent dispatches cover over 300 kilometers in a single day, their approach announced by bells attached to their harnesses. The system binds the empire's impossible distances into something approaching administrative coherence, carrying military intelligence, tax records, and diplomatic correspondence across mountains and deserts with astonishing speed. Ögedei dispatches armies in every direction. Chormagun leads forces into Persia and the Caucasus. In the east, campaigns press into Korea. And in 1235, at a great Kuriltai, Ögedei authorizes the most ambitious expedition yet, a massive western campaign under Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, with the aging genius Subutai as field commander. Their target is Europe. The armies begin assembling on the Volga steppe, a force of perhaps 150,000 warriors preparing to ride into lands that have never seen a Mongol horse. Ögedei himself remains at Karakorum, presiding over feasts and governance in equal measure, his health deteriorating under the weight of drink. The empire he administers stretches wider than any single ruler can truly comprehend, held together by relay riders, loyal generals, and the memory of his father's iron will. The armies gather on the frozen Volga in the winter of 1236, a force unlike anything the Western world has encountered. Batu Khan commands in name, but the strategic mind belongs to Subutai, now past 60, his body heavy, but his genius undimmed. Columns of mounted warriors fan outward across the snow-covered Russian forests, each tumen moving with the precision of a closing fist. Ryazan falls first. In December of 1237, the Mongol host surrounds the wooden-walled city and demands submission. The princes refuse. 5 days of relentless assault with battering rams and incendiary arrows reduce Ryazan to smoking timber. No building stands intact. The chroniclers record that not an eye remained open to weep for the dead. The pattern repeats across the Russian principalities with terrifying speed. Vladimir falls in February of 1238, its grand prince killed at the Battle of the Sit River. Moscow, then a minor settlement, burns. Subutai's columns sweep through the forested north like fire through dry grass, exploiting frozen rivers as highways for cavalry movement. A tactic no steppe army has employed at this scale before. The Mongols withdraw to the southern steppe for summer, regroup, and return. In the autumn of 1240, they turn toward Kiev, the ancient spiritual heart of the Rus lands. The city's golden-domed churches and monasteries rise above the Dnieper, but its defenses are fractured by princely rivalries. In December of 1240, the Mongol siege engines, technologies absorbed from Chinese and Persian engineers, pound Kiev's walls to rubble. The Church of the Tithes, the oldest stone church in the Rus lands, collapses under the weight of citizens who have climbed to its gallery for refuge. Kiev, once among the grandest cities of Eastern Christendom, ceases to exist as a political power for generations. The road to Europe lies open. Subutai devises a campaign of breathtaking coordination. The army divides into 2 wings separated by the Carpathian Mountains, covering hundreds of kilometers of front, communicating by rider relay across mountain passes. The northern wing strikes into Poland. On April 9, 1241, at Legnica, a combined force of Polish Templar and German knights charges the Mongol formations. The Mongols execute a feigned retreat, drawing the heavy European cavalry into pursuit, then wheel and envelop them with arrow fire. Duke Henry the Pious of Silesia dies on the field. The Mongols reportedly carry 9 sacks of ears from the fallen. 2 days later, and 500 kilometers to the south, the main army under Batu and Subutai meets King Bela IV of Hungary at the Sajo River near Mohi. The Hungarians fortify a bridgehead, believing themselves secure. Under cover of darkness on April 11th, Subutai leads a flanking force across the river at a secondary crossing, while the main body storms the bridge with catapult-launched gunpowder bombs, among the first uses of such weapons in European warfare. By dawn, the Hungarian camp is surrounded. The Mongols deliberately leave a gap in their encirclement, a corridor of apparent escape. As the Hungarians flee through it, mounted archers cut them down across 30 kilometers of open plain. The Hungarian army is annihilated. Central Europe lies defenseless. Mongol scouts reach the outskirts of Vienna. Reconnaissance parties probe into Austria and northern Italy. Christendom braces for an apocalypse that seems inevitable. Then, in December of 1241, word arrives across the Yam relay system. Ögedei Khan is dead. Batu Khan, as a prince of the blood, holds the right to participate in the Kuriltai that will choose the next great Khan. By 1242, the Mongol armies begin their withdrawal eastward, pulling back through Hungary and into the Russian steppe. Europe exhales, attributing its salvation to divine intervention, to winter, to anything but the truth, that a succession crisis 8,000 kilometers away has spared an entire continent. Batu Khan never returns west. Instead, he establishes his capital at Sarai, on the lower Volga, where the river bends through flat grassland ideal for grazing. From this seat, the Golden Horde will dominate the Russian principalities for the next 2.5 centuries, extracting tribute, granting authority, and reshaping the political destiny of Eastern Europe from a city of felt and timber that most Western chroniclers will never see. The empire drifts without a rudder. Ögedei Khan dies in December of 1241, and the vast machinery of conquest, armies stretched from Korea to Hungary, administrators governing tens of millions, suddenly lacks a hand at the reins. What follows is not collapse, but something more insidious, a slow, poisonous struggle for supremacy that will consume the royal family for nearly a decade. Töregene Khatun, Ögedei's principal wife, seizes the regency with calculated precision. She is no passive widow. From the imperial camp in the Orkhon Valley, she systematically dismantles her late husband's administration, replacing his ministers with her own loyalists. Ögedei's trusted advisor, the Muslim merchant Mahmud Yalavak, is stripped of authority. In his place rises Fatima, a Persian captive woman who becomes Töregene's closest confidant and most powerful instrument of policy. For 5 years, from 1241 to 1246, Töregene governs an empire spanning from the Pacific to the Danube, maneuvering relentlessly to secure the throne for her son Guyuk. The great Kuriltai finally convenes in the summer of 1246 near the Mongol heartland. Thousands of Gers spread across the steppe in concentric rings of white felt, their smoke holes trailing pale threads into an enormous sky. Princes, generals, and emissaries from every corner of the known world converge on this gathering. Among them stands the Franciscan friar Giovanni da Pian del Carpine, dispatched by Pope Innocent IV, exhausted from 18 months of overland travel. He witnesses the spectacle of Guyuk's enthronement, the silk-draped throne, the rivers of Irag, the submission of vassal kings. Guyuk's response to the Pope's letter requesting Mongol conversion to Christianity is blunt and imperial. He demands the Pope's personal submission and that of all European kings, invoking the mandate of the eternal blue sky. The letter, stamped with the Great Khan's seal in Persian and Mongolian, survives to this day in the Vatican archives. Yet Guyuk's reign proves fragile. He is sickly, prone to drink, and consumed by a bitter rivalry with his cousin Batu Khan of the Golden Horde. In 1248, Guyuk marches westward with an army, ostensibly on campaign, but almost certainly intent on confronting Batu. He never arrives. Somewhere in the mountains of western Mongolia, Guyuk dies, possibly of illness, possibly of poison. He has ruled barely 2 years. Another regency follows. Ogul Kaimish, Guyuk's widow, attempts to hold power, but lacks Töregen's ruthlessness. The empire fractures into factions. Ögedei's descendants cling to their claim. But Batu Khan, the most senior prince of the blood, throws his support behind a different line entirely, the house of Tolui, Genghis Khan's youngest son. His candidate is Mongke, Tolui's eldest son by the formidable Sorghaghtani Beki. On the 1st of July, 1251, a Kuriltai held at Kodoe Aral on the Kurlan River proclaims Mongke as Great Khan. Ögedei's line boycotts the assembly. Mongke responds with a purge of terrifying thoroughness. Princes and princesses of Ögedei's and Chaghatai's houses are arrested, tried, and executed. Fatima, Töregen's old advisor, is drowned. Ogul Kaimish is stripped naked, wrapped in felt, and cast into a river. The message reverberates across the empire. The house of Tolui rules, and dissent means annihilation. With the throne secured, Mongke proves himself a capable and disciplined ruler. He orders a comprehensive census of the empire, reforms taxation, and curtails the corruption that flourished during the interregnum. Then he turns outward. His brother Hulagu receives command of a massive army dispatched toward Persia and the Abbasid heartland. His brother Kublai is sent south to subdue the Dali kingdom in Yunnan. The empire, momentarily paralyzed by its own succession crisis, gathers momentum again. In 1253, the Flemish Franciscan William of Rubruck arrives at Karakorum and finds a city of startling diversity. Buddhist temples beside mosques beside a Nestorian church, merchants speaking a dozen languages, the famous Silver Tree fountain dispensing mare's milk and wine through silver pipes. Rubruck's detailed account preserves a portrait of an empire at its administrative zenith, governed by a Khan who hosts formal theological debates between Christians, Muslims, and Buddhists in his palace. Mongke's ambitions stretch from the Mediterranean to the South China Sea. The campaigns he sets in motion will reshape the entire Islamic world and bring southern China under Mongol dominion. But they will also plant the seeds of permanent division. The mountains of northern Persia rise like broken teeth against a pale sky. In the autumn of 1256, Hulagu Khan's army winds through the Alborz range toward a fortress that has defied conquerors for more than a century. Alamut, the eagle's nest, perches on a narrow ridge above sheer cliffs, its walls seemingly grown from the rock itself. This is the headquarters of the Nizari Ismaili order, the so-called assassins, whose network of mountain strongholds has projected terror across the Islamic world for generations. Hulagu brings siege engineers from China, catapults capable of hurling stones across impossible distances, and an army numbering well over 100,000. The last Nizari Grand Master, Rukn al-Din Kursha, surrenders without prolonged resistance. The fortress libraries, containing rare manuscripts and astronomical instruments, are examined by the Persian scholar Ata Malik Juvaini before the citadel is dismantled stone by stone. One by one, the remaining assassin fortresses across Persia capitulate. An entire shadow state vanishes within months. Hulagu turns south. Baghdad, seat of the Abbasid Caliphate for 5 centuries, sprawls along both banks of the Tigris, its round walls enclosing libraries, hospitals, mosques, and palaces that represent the accumulated intellectual wealth of the Islamic Golden Age. The House of Wisdom, though diminished from its peak, still symbolizes a tradition of scholarship stretching back to the 8th century. Caliph al-Mustasim, the 37th Abbasid Caliph, commands a weakened garrison and relies on diplomacy that never materializes. Mongol forces encircle the city in January of 1258, breaching irrigation dikes to flood escape routes and positioning siege engines along the eastern walls. The bombardment lasts days. On the 10th of February, the walls are breached and the sack begins. What follows devastates one of the great cities of the medieval world. For weeks, Mongol soldiers move through Baghdad's quarters. Libraries are gutted, their contents hurled into the Tigris, which runs dark with dissolved ink. Mosques, palaces, and hospitals burn. Contemporary chroniclers record casualties in the hundreds of thousands, though exact figures remain debated. The caliph himself is wrapped in a carpet and trampled beneath horses, a method of execution that avoids spilling royal blood directly upon the earth, in accordance with Mongol custom. The spiritual center of Sunni Islam ceases to exist as a political entity. 500 years of caliphal authority end in a single month. Yet even as Hulagu consolidates Persia and Mesopotamia into what becomes the Ilkhanate, the empire that dispatched him begins to fracture. In August of 1259, Mongol Khan dies during the siege of Diaoyu fortress in the mountains of Sichuan, far to the east. The news travels slowly across the continent, but its consequences are immediate. Kublai and Arik Boka both claim the succession. Hulagu, needing to monitor this crisis, withdraws the bulk of his forces eastward, leaving a reduced garrison of perhaps 20,000 under the commander Kitbuka in Syria. The Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, led by Sultan Qutuz and his brilliant general Baybars, seizes the moment. On the 3rd of September, 1260, in the Jezreel Valley of Palestine near the spring of Ain Jalut, the Mamluk army meets Kitbuka's diminished force. Baybars leads a vanguard that feigns retreat, drawing the Mongol cavalry into a prepared killing ground where the main Mamluk force waits concealed among the hills. The trap closes. Kitbuka fights to the death. His army is destroyed. Ain Jalut does not end the Mongol threat to the Islamic world, but it establishes a boundary. The Mamluks prove that Mongol armies can be defeated in open battle. More critically, the succession crisis following Mongol's death ensures that the unified empire will never again concentrate its full strength on a single front. The age of coordinated continental conquest is over. 4 separate khanates are crystallizing from the fractures, each powerful, each increasingly independent, each drifting toward its own cultural gravity. While empires fracture and khanates crystallize across the 13th century, the fundamental rhythms of Mongol life persist unchanged beneath the political upheaval. The steppe does not care who sits on a distant throne. The grass grows, the seasons turn, and the people move. A ger rises on open grassland in less than 30 minutes. Women drive the process, unfolding the collapsible willow lattice walls called kana, lashing them into a circular frame, then lifting the central crown, the tuno, into place atop long roof poles called uni. Layers of felt pressed from sheep wool, beaten and rolled across dampened hides until the fibers lock together. Wrap the skeleton in insulation that holds warmth against winter nights dropping to 40 degrees below freezing. A single felt covering can last years. The door always faces south, toward the sun. Inside, the arrangement follows ancient convention. The hearth sits at the center beneath the open tuno, which serves as chimney and skylight. The western side belongs to men, the eastern to women. The northern wall, opposite the door, holds the family altar and the most honored seat. Every object has its place. A ger can be dismantled, loaded onto ox carts or camel-back, and transported to the next campsite within hours. The migrations follow grass. Mongol herders move between 4 and sometimes 6 seasonal camps each year, reading the landscape for signs of fresh pasture, water, and shelter from wind. The 5 sacred animals sustain everything. Horses provide transport, warfare capability, and fermented milk. Sheep yield wool, meat, and fat. Goats contribute cashmere fiber and additional milk. Cattle pull carts and supply leather. Camels carry the heaviest loads across the most punishing terrain. A family's wealth is counted not in gold, but in livestock. The horse stands at the center of existence. Children learn to ride before they can walk steadily on their own legs. A warrior maintains a string of 5 or more horses, rotating mounts to preserve endurance over vast distances. Mares are milked 6 to 8 times daily during summer months. The milk ferments in leather bags hung beside the gia door, stirred by every person who passes, slowly transforming into airag, mildly alcoholic, slightly sour, rich in vitamins that compensate for the near-total absence of vegetables in the nomadic diet. Meat is preserved through air drying in thin strips called borts, a technique that reduces an entire cow to a quantity small enough to carry in a leather pouch. Boiled mutton, consumed with broth, provides the caloric foundation for winter survival. Dried curds called arul store indefinitely and travel well. The diet is almost entirely animal-derived, protein, fat, and fermented dairy sustaining a population that has no agriculture and no permanent granaries. Felt making itself is communal labor. Freshly sheared wool is spread across a wetted hide, sprinkled with water, then rolled tightly around a pole. Horses or people drag the bundle across the ground for hours, the friction and moisture binding fibers into dense, weatherproof sheets. The resulting felt serves as walls, flooring, blankets, saddle padding, and burial shrouds. It is the single most essential material of steppe civilization. Smoke from dried dung fires carries the scent of evening across encampments where dozens of gers cluster in loose formations. Dogs patrol the perimeters. Horses stand hobbled nearby, their breath visible in cold air. The sounds are wind, livestock, and the occasional hawk cry overhead. This is the world that produced the greatest conquerors in human history, not from abundance, but from the discipline of scarcity, the mobility born of owning nothing that cannot be carried, and the intimate knowledge of animals, weather, and terrain that no settled civilization could replicate. The composite bow rests in a craftsman's hands, its unstrung form curving forward in a shape that seems counterintuitive, almost broken. Strips of ibex horn line the belly, their compression strength resisting the force of the draw. Layers of animal sinew, dried and shredded into fine threads, are glued along the back with adhesive rendered from fish bladders. Between these organic layers sits a birchwood core, thin and flexible, binding the whole assembly into a weapon that stores extraordinary energy in a compact frame barely a meter long. The curing process takes months, sometimes more than a year, as each layer must dry and bond before the next is applied. The finished bow, when strung, reverses its curve and delivers a draw weight approaching 75 kilograms, launching arrows with lethal accuracy to distances of 250 to 300 meters. Every mounted warrior carries 2 such bows, one heavier for long-range volleys, one lighter for close combat, along with 60 arrows divided among multiple quivers. The arrowheads vary by purpose: broad-bladed tips for cutting flesh, narrow armor-piercing bodkins for penetrating lamellar plate, whistling heads fitted with hollow bone bulbs designed to shriek in flight and shatter enemy nerve. A lasso of braided horsehair, a sharpening file, and a small hand axe complete the personal kit. The armor itself consists of overlapping iron or hardened leather scales laced together with rawhide cord, forming lamellar plates that flex with the rider's movement while deflecting glancing blows. The army's organizational genius lies in the decimal system imposed during the unification. 10 warriors form an arban, 10 arbans compose a zun of 100, 10 zuns create a mingan of 1,000, and 10 mingans constitute a tumen of 10,000. Officers at every level are selected by merit, not birth. Discipline is absolute. If one soldier in an arban flees battle, all 10 face execution. If an entire arban breaks, the zun bears collective punishment. This structure transforms tribal horsemen into a coordinated force, capable of executing complex maneuvers across vast distances. Training begins in childhood, but reaches its highest expression in the Nerge, the great hunt conducted each winter. Thousands of riders form an enormous arc stretching across dozens of kilometers of steppe and forest, then slowly compress inward over weeks, driving every living creature, wolves, deer, boar, foxes, into a shrinking circle. No animal may be killed until the Khan gives the signal. The Nerge teaches encirclement, communication across distance using flag signals and fire arrows, patience under discipline, and the coordination of widely separated units converging on a single point. These are precisely the tactics that devastate armies from China to Hungary throughout the 13th century. On the battlefield, the feigned retreat becomes the Mongol signature. Light cavalry engage the enemy, loose arrows, then turn and flee in apparent disorder. Pursuing forces break formation, stretch their lines, exhaust their horses. Then the heavy cavalry, held in reserve, strikes the disorganized mass from the flanks. At Mohi, at Legnica, at the Kalka River, this tactic destroys armies that outnumber the Mongol force. Psychological warfare amplifies every victory. Survivors are deliberately released to spread terror. Cities that resist face total annihilation. Cities that surrender immediately are spared. The calculation is precise. Each massacre reduces the need for the next siege. The Mongol army moves at speeds no contemporary force can match, covering 100 kilometers in a single day. Each warrior rides with a string of 4 to 5 remounts, switching horses to maintain pace. Dried meat and curd carried in saddlebags eliminates the need for supply trains. Rivers are crossed on inflated animal skin rafts. Intelligence gathered by merchant spies and advanced scouts maps every route, every ford, every fortress months before the main army arrives. This is not a barbarian horde. It is the most sophisticated military system the medieval world produces, built from the simplest materials the steppe provides. A lone rider gallops across the steppe, a wooden tablet hanging from his neck, its surface inscribed in Uyghur-Mongolian script and inlaid with a silver tiger. He does not slow for rivers or mountain passes. Every 40 kilometers, a station appears, a cluster of jurs surrounded by corrals holding fresh horses, staffed by families whose sole obligation to the empire is maintaining this link in an unbroken chain. The rider dismounts, seizes a fresh mount, and vanishes into the distance within minutes. This is the Yam, the nervous system of the largest contiguous empire the world has ever known. By the 1230s, Ogedei Khan formalizes what Genghis Khan envisioned, a relay network spanning the breadth of Eurasia. Approximately 1,400 stations stretch from the Pacific coast to the Black Sea, each maintaining supplies of food, bedding, and between 15 and 400 horses depending on the route's importance. Riders carrying urgent imperial dispatches cover over 300 kilometers in a single day, their approach announced by bells so fresh, mounts stand ready. The gold paisa, a tablet of authority stamped with the Khan's seal, guarantees its bearer food, lodging, horses, and absolute right of passage. To obstruct a paisa holder is to defy the Khan himself. The Yam carries more than messages. It carries the empire's coherence. Tax records flow from provincial governors to the capital. Intelligence reports from frontier commanders reach Karakoram within weeks rather than months. Diplomats, missionaries, and merchants travel under its protection. The Franciscan friar William of Rubruck rides this network to Karakoram in 1253, marveling at its efficiency. A decade later, the Venetian merchants Niccolo and Maffeo Polo follow these same protected roads eastward, reaching Kublai Khan's court in 1266. The security the Mongols impose transforms continental commerce. Caravans of Bactrian camels, laden with Chinese silk, porcelain, and lacquerware, cross the Taklamakan Desert under Mongol patrol. Persian ceramics, glassware, and astronomical instruments move eastward. Indian spices reach markets in Tabriz, where Italian merchants purchase them for European tables. The bazaars of Karakoram, modest in architecture, yet extraordinary in diversity, display goods from Korea, China, Persia, Byzantium, and Western Europe within a single marketplace. Silver from European mines flows east to purchase silk. Chinese paper money, an astonishing innovation to Western travelers, lubricates trade within Yuan territories. Technologies migrate with the merchants. Gunpowder formulas, refined in Chinese laboratories, travel westward through Mongol-controlled corridors. Persian and Arab medical knowledge flows east. Printing techniques, textile patterns, and agricultural methods cross boundaries that had been impassable for centuries. Astronomers in the Ilkhanate Observatory at Marageh work alongside Chinese colleagues, sharing star catalogues and mathematical systems. Cobalt pigment from Persia reaches Chinese kilns, producing the blue and white porcelain that will define an entire ceramic tradition. The roads themselves bear physical witness to this exchange. Caravanserais, fortified inns spaced a day's travel apart, dot the routes through Central Asia, their thick mud-brick walls enclosing courtyards where camels rest and merchants negotiate in half a dozen languages. In Tabriz, the Ilkhanate capital, the covered bazaar stretches for kilometers, its vaulted brick ceilings echoing with commerce conducted in Persian, Arabic, Turkic, Mongolian, and Italian. Genoese and Venetian trading colonies establish permanent presence along the Black Sea coast, their account books recording transactions that link Mediterranean banking houses to Chinese silk producers. This is the Pax Mongolica, not a peace born of goodwill, but one enforced by the memory of absolute destruction. The same empire that leveled Merv and Baghdad now guarantees that a merchant can travel from the Yellow Sea to the Mediterranean without fear of banditry. The cost of this security is submission. The reward is a connected world, a Eurasian web of exchange unprecedented in scale and density. Ideas, inventions, religions, artistic styles, and diseases now travel roads that will remain open for over a century, reshaping every civilization they touch. Among the roads that carry silk and spices, another cargo moves with equal persistence: faith itself. The Mongol Empire, stretching across civilizations that worship in radically different ways, does not impose a single creed. Instead, it shelters them all beneath the canopy of the eternal blue sky, and this deliberate pluralism becomes one of the empire's most distinctive and enduring features. The foundation is Tengrism, the ancient spiritual framework of the steppe. Smoke rises from juniper branches burning inside a shaman's gur, the air thick with the scent of resin and animal fat. A ritual drum, its surface stretched from horsehide and painted with cosmological symbols, beats in steady rhythm as the shaman enters a trance state, mediating between the visible world and the spirit realm above. Tengri, the eternal blue sky, presides over all existence. The Earth Mother, Etugen, sustains the land. Mountains, rivers, and individual trees possess their own spirits requiring acknowledgement and appeasement. Genghis Khan himself attributes his rise to the mandate of Tengri, and this conviction that heaven sanctions Mongol rule provides theological justification for universal empire. The Yasa, the legal code attributed to the founder, enshrines religious tolerance as imperial policy. Clergy of every faith receive exemption from taxation and forced labor, a provision that makes cooperation with Mongol authority spiritually painless for conquered peoples. Long before the conquests begin, Christianity already inhabits the steppe. The Karaites, one of the most powerful 12th century confederations, practice Nestorian Christianity, their faith carried eastward along the Silk Road centuries earlier by missionaries of the Church of the East. Bronze crosses appear in Mongol-era graves across the plateau. The Ungud tribe similarly maintains Nestorian traditions. Sorghaghtani Beki, the mother of 4 Khans, is herself a devout Nestorian Christian who simultaneously patronizes Muslim scholars and Buddhist monks with calculated generosity. Within the walls of Karakoram, this pluralism takes physical form. 12 Buddhist temples rise alongside 2 mosques and 1 Nestorian church, their congregations separated by mere streets. Tibetan Thangka paintings hang in monastery halls where monks chant sutras, while muezzins call the faithful to prayer from nearby minarets. Taoist sages invited by Genghis Khan himself during the campaign against Khwarezm maintain their own presence. The Taoist master Chiu Chuji travels thousands of kilometers to meet the Khan in the Hindu Kush, and his disciples receive imperial patronage for decades afterward. The most remarkable expression of this tolerance occurs in 1254, when Mongol Khan convenes a formal interfaith debate at Karakoram. Buddhist, Christian, and Muslim representatives argue their theological positions before the court, while the Franciscan friar William of Rubruck observes and later records the proceedings. The debate, fueled by copious quantities of airag, ends without a victor, precisely as Mongol intends. The Khan's message is clear: no single faith commands exclusive truth, and all operate under Mongol sufferance. This tolerance is strategic as much as spiritual. Muslim administrators manage the finances of the Ilkhanate. Buddhist advisors shape Yuan dynasty governance. Christian merchants facilitate trade with Europe. By granting religious freedom, the empire secures the loyalty of diverse populations without the cost of suppression. Tax exemptions for clergy transform religious leaders into willing collaborators who preach obedience to Mongol authority from their own pulpits, temples, and mosques. Yet tolerance has limits shaped by power. When religious institutions grow too wealthy or politically ambitious, the Khans intervene. Competing Buddhist and Taoist claims over property in northern China require imperial arbitration on multiple occasions during the 1250s and 1260s. Faith remains free only so long as it serves, or at least does not threaten, the interests of the throne beneath the eternal blue sky. The throne beneath the eternal blue sky is never occupied by one figure alone. Behind every Khan, beside every conqueror, Mongol women wield authority that would astonish the sedentary civilizations their husbands subjugate. This power is not borrowed or ceremonial. It is structural, woven into the fabric of steppe life itself. When Temujin rides to war, Berta governs. She manages the vast ordu, the mobile court of thousands of jurs, tens of thousands of livestock, the logistics of seasonal migration across hundreds of kilometers. She controls the household treasury, adjudicates disputes among subordinate families, and oversees the distribution of resources that keeps the imperial machine fed and moving. Her council shapes alliances. Her judgment on matters of succession carries weight that even the Khan respects. She bears 4 sons who will divide an empire, and her status as primary wife establishes the legitimacy of the entire Borjigin ruling line. No descendant of a secondary wife can claim the throne without challenge. Mongol women ride horses from childhood. They own property, herds, jurs, servants, and territory granted as appanages. They inherit wealth. A widow controls her deceased husband's estate until her sons come of age, and sometimes long after. The elaborate Bokta headdress, a tall birch bark frame covered in silk and crowned with feathers, marks a married woman of rank. These towering structures, sometimes reaching 2 feet in height, signal authority visible across an entire encampment. When Ögedei Khan dies in December of 1241, the empire does not collapse into anarchy. Turagena Khatun, his widow, seizes the regency and governs the largest empire on earth for nearly 5 years. She manipulates the factional politics of the royal family, delays the Kuriltai to ensure her son Guyuk's election, and replaces Ögedei's ministers with her own appointees. The Persian administrator Fatima, her closest advisor, wields influence that infuriates rival factions. Turagan's regency is no passive caretaking. She reshapes the imperial bureaucracy, redirects patronage networks, and ensures that when the Kuriltai finally convenes in 1246, the outcome is predetermined. Guyuk's reign lasts barely 2 years before his death in 1248. His widow Ogul Kaymish assumes the regency, but lacks Turagana's political acumen. She fails to build coalitions, alienates powerful princes, and cannot prevent the Toluid faction from seizing the initiative. The architect of that seizure is Sorghaghtani Beki, widow of Genghis Khan's youngest son Tolui. The Persian historian Rashid al-Din describes her as the most intelligent woman in the world. A Nestorian Christian married into a Tengrist dynasty, she navigates religious and political boundaries with extraordinary precision. She refuses remarriage to Guyuk, preserving her independence and her son's claims. She administers her appanage territories in northern China with a sophistication that earns respect from both Mongol and Chinese subjects, implementing agricultural taxation rather than converting farmland to pasture as other Mongol lords prefer. Her 4 sons, Mungke, Kublai, Hulagu, and Arik-Böke, will collectively rule from the Pacific to the Mediterranean. This is no accident. Sorghaghtani cultivates alliances with Batu Khan of the Golden Horde, secures military support from key commanders, and orchestrates the Kuriltai of 1251 that places Mungke on the throne. She ensures each son receives education suited to governance. Kublai studies Chinese philosophy. Hulagu prepares for Western campaigns. She dies in 1252, months after seeing her eldest son crowned. But the empire her sons inherit bears the unmistakable imprint of her strategic vision. The power of these women reflects no anomaly but a system. Steppe survival demands that half the population possess full competence in management, defense, and decision-making. When men ride to wars lasting years, women become the empire's operational spine. They manage the production of felt, the fermentation of ayrag, the breeding of horses, the collection of tribute. They sit in councils. They receive ambassadors. The Franciscan friar John of Plano Carpini, visiting the Mongol court in 1246, finds Turagana presiding over imperial affairs with absolute command. The civil war begins before the empire's grief has settled. In 1260, 2 brothers claim the throne of the great Khan, Kublai, commanding the wealthy territories of northern China, and Arik-Böke, holding the Mongol heartland and the ancient capital of Karakorum. The steppe itself fractures along this fault line. Arik-Böke receives the endorsement of a Kuriltai in Mongolia, while Kublai convenes his own assembly at Kaiping, his summer residence north of the Great Wall. For 4 years, armies loyal to each brother clash across the grasslands, severing supply lines, burning pastures, starving garrisons into submission. By 1264, Arik-Böke surrenders. Kublai Khan stands as sole ruler of an empire, already splintering at its edges, but his gaze turns not toward the steppe of his ancestors. It turns south, toward China. The city that rises from the dusty plain north of the old Jin capital is called Dadu, the Great Capital. The world will know it as Khanbalik, the city of the Khan. Its rammed earth walls stretch across roughly 50 square kilometers, enclosing a grid of broad avenues oriented to the cardinal directions. At its heart, the imperial palace complex sprawls behind successive gates, its halls roofed in glazed terracotta tiles of deep yellow and green, its courtyards paved in marble. Artificial lakes shimmer within the grounds, fed by diverted streams. This is not a nomad's encampment scaled upward. This is a deliberate statement of permanence, a Mongol ruler building in the Chinese imperial tradition while maintaining the felt-walled ger erected within the palace grounds where he sleeps. In 1271, Kublai proclaims the Yuan dynasty, adopting a Chinese dynastic name drawn from the Book of Changes. He staffs his administration with a mixture of Mongol nobles, Central Asian Muslims, and Chinese bureaucrats, though ethnic Chinese are largely excluded from the highest positions. The Grand Canal undergoes massive extension, linking the rice-producing south directly to Khan Balik, ensuring the capital's grain supply flows uninterrupted across nearly 1,800 kilometers of engineered waterway. The Song dynasty, the last holdout of Chinese independence, falls in stages. Hangzhou, the glittering Song capital with its 1,000,000 inhabitants, surrenders in 1276. The child emperor is captured. Loyalist forces retreat southward, fighting from boats and coastal fortresses until the naval battle at Yarman in 1279, where the last Song pretender drowns and the dynasty perishes at sea. For the first time in history, all of China falls under foreign rule. Yet the ocean proves less yielding than any dynasty. In 1274, a fleet carrying roughly 40,000 soldiers crosses the strait toward Japan. Fierce samurai resistance and a devastating storm force retreat. In 1281, a vastly larger armada of approximately 4,400 ships carries over 140,000 troops. A typhoon of extraordinary violence scatters and destroys the fleet. The Japanese call this wind kamikaze, the divine wind. A third planned invasion never materializes. An expedition against Java in 1293 similarly fails to establish lasting control. Around 1275, a Venetian merchant named Marco Polo arrives at Kublai's court and remains for nearly 17 years. His later account describes a civilization of paper money, coal-burning furnaces, an imperial postal system of astonishing efficiency, and a ruler who presides over feasts of 10,000 guests. Whether embellished or precise, the account transmits to Europe an image of wealth and sophistication that reshapes Western understanding of the East for centuries. Kublai Khan dies in 1294 at the age of 79, heavy with gout, grief over his favorite wife Chabi's death, and the weight of an empire that stretches beyond any single ruler's capacity to hold. The Yuan dynasty will endure another 7 decades, but the creative tension between Mongol identity and Chinese civilization that Kublai embodied, sleeping in a gyre inside a marble palace, begins to dissolve. His successors lack his vision. The dynasty he built carries within it the seeds of its own unraveling. The empire does not shatter like glass. It pulls apart slowly, like felt stretched beyond its threads, each khanate drifting into its own gravity, its own language of power, its own understanding of what it means to be Mongol. By the 1260s, the fiction of unity has already frayed past repair. 4 vast territories operate under nominal allegiance to a single great Khan, but the reality on the ground tells a different story. The Yuan dynasty governs China from Khan Balik. The Chagatai Khanate sprawls across the steppe and oasis cities of Central Asia. The Ilkhanate administers Persia, Mesopotamia, and parts of Anatolia from its capital at Tabriz. The Golden Horde commands the western steppe from Sarai on the lower Volga. Each inherits the Mongol military tradition. Each transforms it into something the founders would barely recognize. In Tabriz, the transformation is most dramatic. Blue-tiled facades rise along broad avenues, their geometric patterns reflecting Persian artistic traditions that predate the Mongol conquest by centuries. The Ilkhanate rulers, descendants of Hulagu, initially govern as Buddhist-leaning overlords of a predominantly Muslim population. The tension proves unsustainable. In 1295, Genghis Khan converts to Islam, and the conversion reshapes the state entirely. Persian administrators fill the bureaucracy. Arabic script dominates official correspondence. Mongol law blends with Islamic jurisprudence. Under Ghazan's patronage, the physician and scholar Rashid al-Din compiles the Jami al-Tawarikh around 1307, a universal history of unprecedented scope, illustrated with Persian miniatures depicting Mongol warriors in vivid detail. These manuscripts, painted on paper manufactured with techniques carried from China, represent the empire's cultural fusion at its most refined. The Ilkhanate flourishes as a center of learning and trade until the death of Abu Sa'id in 1335, after which it dissolves into competing successor states. Along the Volga, Sarai grows into one of the largest cities of the medieval world, its population reaching an estimated 75,000. The Golden Horde maintains Mongol military structures while gradually absorbing Turkic language and customs. Under Özbeg Khan, who reigns from 1313 to 1341, Islam becomes the official religion. Mosques rise beside the bathhouses and markets of Sarai. Russian princes journey south to receive the Yarlik, the charter granting them authority to rule their own principalities in exchange for tribute. The system reshapes Eastern European politics for generations, channeling wealth northward through Moscow, which grows powerful precisely because its princes prove most reliable in collecting Mongol taxes. The Chagatai Khanate remains the most divided. Its western half, encompassing the irrigated cities of Transoxiana, Bukhara, Samarkand, gravitates toward Persian and Islamic culture. Its eastern half clings to nomadic traditions, resisting urbanization and conversion. This internal fracture between settled and steppe Mongols mirrors the original tension within the empire itself, the unresolved question of whether conquest should transform the conqueror. Across all four khanates, a paradox emerges. The very success of Mongol administration, its tolerance, its trade networks, its willingness to employ conquered peoples, accelerates assimilation. Mongol rulers marry local dynasties. They adopt local religions. They speak local languages in court. The decimal military organization persists, but the cultural identity that once bound the empire dissolves into the civilizations it conquered. Persian miniatures depict Mongol Khans in Islamic settings. Chinese court records describe Yuan emperors performing Confucian rituals. Golden Horde coins bear Arabic inscriptions praising Allah. The empire becomes four worlds, each carrying fragments of the original vision: the meritocratic appointments, the religious tolerance, the postal roads, the trade protections, embedded within civilizations far older and more deeply rooted than the steppe culture that briefly united them. What Genghis Khan built as a single instrument of conquest transforms into four distinct experiments in governance, each answering differently the question of what survives when conquerors settle among the conquered. The wooden cities of the Russian principalities stand like dark islands in a sea of snow and forest. Log walls blackened by smoke, onion-domed churches rising above birch groves, muddy tracks connecting settlements separated by vast stretches of taiga. Into this world of isolated princes and feuding boyars, the Golden Horde extends its authority like a hand pressing down on a map, reshaping everything beneath it for nearly 2.5 centuries. The system takes shape in the 1240s under Batu Khan and his successors. Every Russian prince who wishes to rule must travel south to Sarai, the Horde's capital on the lower Volga, and kneel before the Khan to receive a yarlik, a charter of authority granting permission to govern. Without this document, no prince holds legitimate power. The journey itself is a ritual of submission, sometimes lasting months across frozen steppe, and not every prince returns alive. Those who resist find their cities burned, their populations scattered. Tribute flows northward in the form of silver, furs, wax, and human beings. The Baskak system places Mongol tax collectors directly within Russian cities, conducting censuses, assessing wealth, and demanding payment with mathematical precision inherited from the empire's Chinese and Persian administrative traditions. Households accounted, livestock tallied, grain stores measured. The weight of taxation reshapes the Russian economy, redirecting surplus wealth southward to Sarai. That capital city sprawls along the Volga's banks, reaching an estimated 75,000 inhabitants at its peak, a cosmopolitan center with brick bathhouses, covered markets, mosques with glazed tile minarets, and quarters for merchants from Genoa, Egypt, and Central Asia. Coins minted at Sarai circulate across the trade networks connecting the Black Sea to the Silk Road. The city hums with commerce, while the Russian north endures its quiet extraction. Yet within this system of subjugation, one principality begins its improbable ascent. Moscow, a minor settlement in the 1240s, gains favor through consistent loyalty and reliable tribute delivery. Its princes master the art of collaboration, serving as the Khan's preferred tax collectors for surrounding territories. Ivan Kalita, Prince of Moscow from 1325 to 1341, earns his name, Moneybag, by efficiently gathering tribute from other Russian lands on the horde's behalf. Each payment consolidates Moscow's authority over its neighbors, transforming a servant's role into a foundation for future sovereignty. The horde's own fractures accelerate this shift. Internal succession wars weaken central authority through the 1360s. In 1380, Grand Prince Dmitry of Moscow leads a coalition of Russian forces southward to the field of Kulikovo, where the Don River bends through open steppe. There, for the first time, a Russian army defeats a major Mongol force in pitched battle. The victory does not end Mongol dominion. The horde's Khan Tokhtamysh sacks Moscow just 2 years later in retaliation, but it shatters the myth of invincibility. Dmitry earns the title Donskoy, of the Don, and the memory of Kulikovo becomes a founding story of Russian resistance. A century of slow dissolution follows. The Golden Horde fragments into competing successor Khanates, Kazan, Astrakhan, Crimea, Sibir. Moscow grows steadily stronger, absorbing neighboring principalities, building stone fortifications, developing its own centralized bureaucracy modeled in part on Mongol administrative practices. The census techniques, the postal relay concepts, the principle of absolute sovereign authority, these Mongol inheritances embed themselves within the emerging Russian state. The final act unfolds in 1480 along the Ugra River. The forces of Ivan III of Moscow and Khan Ahmad of the Great Horde face each other across the water for weeks. No great battle occurs. Ahmad withdraws, his alliance with Lithuania having failed to materialize, his own realm crumbling from within. The great stand on the Ugra marks the formal end of Mongol suzerainty over Russia, 240 years after Batu Khan's armies first rode through the frozen forests. The yoke lifts, but its imprint remains, in the autocratic governance structures, in the vocabulary of power, in the eastward orientation of a civilization forever changed by the centuries spent beneath the shadow of the steppe. The roads that once carried silk and spices now carry something invisible and merciless. Somewhere in the grasslands of Central Asia, in the early 1330s, a pestilence stirs among burrowing rodents, marmots whose pelts Mongol and Turkic traders have handled for generations. The bacterium Yersinia pestis finds its way into fleas, into caravans, into the very arteries of commerce that the Pax Mongolica so carefully opened. The empire's greatest achievement becomes the instrument of its unraveling. Abandoned caravanserais dot the trade routes like hollow skulls. Mud brick walls still standing, but the courtyards empty, the stables silent, the wells untended. Along the roads connecting Sarai to Tabriz, Tabriz to Constantinople, the plague moves westward with terrible patience. By 1346, it reaches the Crimean port of Kaffa, where Genoese merchants maintain a trading colony under Golden Horde authority. Mongol forces besieging the city allegedly catapult plague-stricken corpses over the walls, one of history's earliest recorded attempts at biological warfare. Genoese ships fleeing Kaffa carry infected rats across the Black Sea. By October of 1347, the pestilence reaches Messina in Sicily. Within 5 years, it consumes Europe. The scale defies comprehension. An estimated 75 to 200 million people perish across Eurasia. Cities that thrived under Mongol trade protection become charnel houses. The network of yam stations, the camel caravans, the merchant ships, every sinew connecting the empire's vast body becomes a conduit for death. Yet plague alone does not fracture the Mongol world. In China, the Yuan dynasty has been hemorrhaging legitimacy for decades. Togon Timur, enthroned in 1333 as the last Yuan emperor, presides over a court paralyzed by factionalism. Catastrophic flooding of the Yellow River in 1344 demands a massive labor conscription to reroute the waterway, a project that drives hundreds of thousands of desperate Chinese peasants into open rebellion. The Red Turban movement erupts across the south, fueled by millenarian Buddhist prophecies and raw hunger. Warlords carve out fiefdoms from the decaying imperial structure. From among these rebels rises Zhu Yuanzhang, born into destitution in 1328, orphaned by famine, briefly a novice in a Buddhist monastery before joining the Red Turbans. His military genius and political cunning prove extraordinary. He systematically eliminates rival warlord states. Chen Yuliang falls at the massive naval battle of Lake Poyang in 1363. Jiang Shicheng's domain collapses by 1367. Zhu consolidates the south into a formidable power base. In 1368, Zhu Yuanzhang proclaims the Ming dynasty and sends his armies northward. The assault on Khan Balik meets surprisingly little resistance. Togon Timur flees the capital in September, riding north through the gates his ancestor Kublai had built a century before. The rammed earth walls of Dadu, the marble palaces, the grand astronomical instruments all pass into Ming hands. The Mongol court retreats to the steppe, establishing what historians call the Northern Yuan, a diminished successor state that persists in various forms until 1635. The symmetry is haunting. A people who rode out of the grasslands to conquer the known world now ride back into those same grasslands, carrying with them the memory of an empire that once stretched from the Pacific to the Danube. The trade routes fall silent, the caravanserais crumble, the great connecting tissue of the Mongol world, Roads, relay stations, merchant networks, diplomatic channels, dissolves into regional isolation. Eurasia fragments into separate civilizations that will not be reconnected at this scale for centuries. The empire that unified the world has, in its very connectedness, delivered the catastrophe that tears it apart. From the ruins of the Chagatai Khanate, from the dust of a fractured Mongol world, a figure emerges who will attempt to reassemble the empire through sheer force of will. Timur, born in 1336 near the city of Kesh in Transoxiana, is not a Chinggisid by blood. He belongs to the Barlas tribe, a Turkicized Mongol clan, and he walks with a pronounced limp from wounds sustained in his youth, a detail that earns him the Persian epithet Timur-e-Lang, Timur the Lame, corrupted in European tongues to Tamerlane. What he lacks in royal lineage he compensates through marriage into the Chinggisid house, styling himself son-in-law of the great Khan, and through a military brilliance that rivals the original conqueror himself. By 1370, Timur has consolidated control over Transoxiana. Samarkand becomes his capital, and he pours the wealth of conquered nations into transforming it. The Registan Square rises as a monumental public space flanked by madrasas, sheathed in turquoise and cobalt tilework. The Bibi-Ka-Nim Mosque, commissioned after the Indian campaign, stretches its vast portal skyward, one of the largest religious structures in the Islamic world. The Gur-e-Amir Mausoleum, where Timur will eventually rest beneath a slab of dark jade, lifts a fluted dome of pale green above the city's roofline. His campaigns are staggering in scope and devastation. Between 1380 and 1405, Timur's armies sweep through Persia, Mesopotamia, the Caucasus, and Anatolia. The sack of Isfahan in 1388 produces towers built from 70,000 skulls. Delhi falls in 1398, its wealth stripped so thoroughly that the city takes a century to recover. In 1402, at the Battle of Ankara, Timur defeats and captures the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I, temporarily shattering Ottoman power and delaying the fall of Constantinople by half a century. Yet Timur is not merely a destroyer. His court attracts astronomers, poets, architects, and painters. The Timurid cultural renaissance that flowers under his successors represents one of the great artistic achievements of the Islamic world. In Herat, under the patronage of Sultan Hussein Baykara in the late 15th century, the miniature painter Kamaleddin Behzad produces works of extraordinary delicacy and psychological depth. In Samarkand, Timur's grandson Ulugh Beg constructs an astronomical observatory in the 1420s, producing star catalogues of unprecedented accuracy that remain authoritative for 2 centuries. Timur dies in 1405, marching toward China, his final ambition unfulfilled. His empire fragments among his descendants, but the Timurid cultural legacy endures with remarkable tenacity. In 1483, a prince named Zahiruddin Muhammad Babur is born in the Fergana Valley, descended from Timur on his father's side and from Genghis Khan through his mother. Driven from Central Asia by Uzbek conquests, Babur turned south. In 1526, at the Battle of Panipat, his small army equipped with matchlock firearms and field artillery defeats the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi. Babur establishes the Mughal dynasty, the very name a Persian rendering of Mongol, which will rule the Indian subcontinent for over 3 centuries. The thread stretches unbroken. From the steppe to Samarkand, from Samarkand to Delhi, the Mongol inheritance transforms, but never entirely disappears. Timurid architectural principles flow into Mughal masterworks. The administrative traditions of steppe governance blend with Persian bureaucracy and Indian complexity. The last great echo of the Mongol imperial tradition settles into the soil of South Asia, where it will produce monuments, legal systems, and cultural syntheses that endure into the modern age. The conqueror's dream of universal empire has not died. It has simply changed its language. The language changed, but the echo persists. Across the centuries that follow Babur's conquest, the Mongol inheritance weaves itself into the fabric of civilizations that scarcely remember its origin. In Agra, along the banks of the Yamuna River, the Taj Mahal rises in the 17th century. Its symmetrical gardens, its white marble inlaid with semi-precious stone, its soaring central dome, all descending from Timurid architectural traditions born in Samarkand. The mausoleum is a Mughal masterwork, and Mughal means Mongol. In Moscow, the autocratic traditions of the Tsars carry the imprint of 2.5 centuries under the Golden Horde. The centralized taxation systems, the postal relay networks, the very concept of absolute sovereign authority that defines Russian governance for hundreds of years, trace their lineage to the administrative machinery first designed on the steppe. The Russian word for money, dengi, derives from the Mongol tenge. Geneticists working in laboratories in the early 2000s publish findings that stagger the imagination. An estimated 16 million men across Asia carry a Y chromosomal lineage traceable to a single individual who lived approximately 800 years ago in Mongolia. The statistical probability points toward Genghis Khan and his immediate male descendants, a genetic legacy unmatched by any other figure in recorded history. On the Mongolian steppe itself, the land remembers. The Orkhon Valley, where Karakorum once stood as the capital of the world's largest contiguous empire, receives designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2004. Archaeologists carefully excavate the stone tortoise bases that once supported commemorative steles, uncover fragments of the Palace of 10,000 Tranquilities, and map the outlines of a city that hosted every faith and welcomed every traveler. The carved granite turtles still sit in the grass, patient as the centuries. At Tsonjin Bulldog, 54 kilometers east of Ulaanbaatar, a 40-meter stainless steel equestrian statue of Genghis Khan gazes across the steppe, completed in 2008. It is the largest equestrian statue on Earth. Below it, a museum displays replica armor, composite bows, and gold paisa tablets. Modern Mongolia, a nation of approximately 3.3 million people, places the founder's face on its currency, names its international airport after him, and teaches his story as the central narrative of national identity. Horsemen still ride the grasslands in autumn, following migration routes that have not fundamentally changed in 1,000 years. Gers of white felt dot the landscape from the Altai to the Khenti range. Airag ferments in leather bags hung beside doorways. The 5 sacred animals, horse, sheep, goat, cow, and camel, still define the pastoral economy. Somewhere near Burkhan Khaldun Mountain, in a location that has never been confirmed, the tomb of Genghis Khan remains hidden, protected by the silence of the land itself. The search continues. Satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and international archaeological teams probe the valleys and ridgelines of the Khenti province. The mountain is now a highly restricted area under Mongolian law, its forests and streams shielded from development. The secret burial, carried out in 1227 by soldiers who reportedly diverted a river over the grave site, has kept its promise across nearly 8 centuries. What the Mongol Empire built was never merely an empire of territory. It was an empire of connection, a system that linked China to Persia, Persia to Russia, Russia to Europe, and Europe back to China in a single circulatory network of trade, knowledge, disease, and transformation. Gunpowder moved westward. Paper and printing followed. The plague traveled the same roads. The modern world, with its interconnected economies and transcontinental exchanges, is in many ways the inheritor of a framework first imposed by riders from the steppe, who believed they held a mandate from the eternal blue sky. The hoofbeats have faded into the grass, but the ground still trembles with their memory. Thank you for journeying across 8 centuries of history. If this story moved you, consider subscribing so you never miss the next voyage into the ancient world.